Hello everybody, we are back and we are doing the Champions Cup series again after a 4-month hiatus. We had taken off obviously because of the playoffs, free agency, the draft, all that good stuff. It kind of got in the way of this series, but we are back hopefully doing 2 a week, and today we have the 1928-29 NHL season. But before we start with it, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me or the channel. If not, no big deal. Now let's get into it. So this is year 12 in the NHL, and I was going to say 12th, but that sounds wrong, and I keep wanting to say 12. So anyway, we're just going to say year 12, and it is again a 44 game schedule in the league. When the league started out, it was a lot fewer games, or fewer games in general, but they seem to be around this point getting consistently to a 44 game schedule. And interestingly enough, this would be the first year we would supposedly see a player wear protective element for their headwear, I guess if you want to call it that, on a permanent basis, not because of an injury, but because they want to protect the melon, that player being George Owen. And I've been going through every year for the divisions in the earlier stages of this series, talking about each team and how they did, but I'm just going to kind of put it up on the screen here. Maybe it covers it up all the way, I don't know. But anyway, we're going to be talking about some of the teams here, how they did, blah, 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 and you can look at it while I talk about it. So basically, in the Canadian division, Montreal was the best of the bunch, yet again, with the Habs taking the top spot, and the previously bad New York Americans finishing second in the division, and Toronto would take the final playoff spot, making it in there for the 3rd place, and the Maroons finishing last after a 2nd place finish prior to this season. As for the American division, the Bruins remain top dogs, or Bears if you will, with the defending Stanley Cup champions, the New York Rangers, finishing 2nd, the Detroit Cougars finishing 3rd, and notably Chicago was last for a 2nd straight season. The league's top scorer was Ace Bailey of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He had 22 goals, either 10 or 11 assists. I couldn't remember. I ended up messing up on my notes. But basically 32 or 33 points in 44 games. Not too shabby for him. As for the Hart Trophy, it was Roy Werters of the New York Americans, who again were having a bounce-back season. And Roy, of course, was leading the way with a 16-12-10 record, 1.61 goals against average, and 8 shutouts, so that was good for the Americans, who obviously would like to have their goalie play well so they can make it to the postseason. As for the Vezina, it was not Werters, it was George Hainsworth, as Montreal again locks up this award, and it is impressive because Hainsworth allowed only 43 goals in 44 games played with 22 shutouts. I believe when I was going through, this is the year that had the most shutouts per games played in NHL history, so they basically had to make a bunch of rule changes going into the next season because a lot of people even back then didn't really like a lot of low-scoring games. And then we have a change to the playoffs, as we see the 2 seeds play the 2 seeds and the 3 seeds play the 3 seeds, with the 1 seeds having a bye and then end up playing each other. But I think that is how it works because they change it so often early on, whereas before it was interdivision play, 2 plays to 3, 1 gets a bye, so it makes things interesting. But the first round of the playoffs is a 2-game total goal series, if I'm not mistaken. So in the first round, the New York Americans from the Canadian division play the New York Rangers of the American division, and what we see here is a fairly low scoring series, 2-game total goal series, where the first game ends 0-0, so of course whoever wins the next game is going to win the series. That is the Rangers that win it 1-0 to move on to the second round. As for the second round clash between the Toronto Maple Leafs and Detroit Cougars, it went as follows. Game 1, Toronto wins this one 3-1, so Detroit needs 3 goals in Game 2 to none to Toronto in order to win this one, but unfortunately for them, it is Toronto that wins 4-1, so they win the series 7-2. Then in the semifinals, we get to see a rather interesting thing where you get to see both 1 seeds play each other, so the 2 best teams end up playing each other. I don't know why they decided to do it that way, but they did. And for them, they would get 3 games, I'm guessing because they are the 1 seed, so you get a little bit more wiggle room. But you had to basically win 3 games in the series, if I'm not mistaken. So basically like a 5-game series. And so we got to see Boston and Montreal pretty early on with this rivalry getting heated, and it went as follows. Game 1, Boston wins 1-0 to take a 1-0 series lead. Game 2, Boston wins again 1-0 to take a 2-0 series lead, before finally in Game 3, the Bruins would get the better of the Habs, winning 3-2, another close game, but unfortunately for Montreal, they would not be headed to the Stanley Cup Final, whereas the Bruins would. As for the other semifinals, it was the New York Rangers against the Toronto Maple Leafs, so another original six matchup, if you will. Game 1 ends up going in the Rangers' favor, 1-0, so they win that one. And I believe the non-1 seeds basically only have to win 2 games, which of course New York would be able to do in overtime, 2-1 to take down the Maple Leafs to end up going on to play the Bruins in the Stanley Cup Final, as these two early on have a lot of hatred for each other, which explains how a lot of fans feel today, because this is built right here over 100 years ago, or about 100 years ago, and it was in the Stanley Cup Final where we got to see these two meet. And for this series, I'm assuming, again, because the NHL makes things kind of wacky on a year-to-year basis, the final was going to be whoever won 2 games first. So in Game 1, Boston ends up winning 2-0 to end up winning this game and then leading the series 1-0. And then in Game 2, the Bruins win 2-1 to win the Stanley Cup Final. And just like that, the Bruins win their first Stanley Cup Final ever. So they are, for the first time, they're champions in the NHL. That would be one of their 6th to date NHL championships. And of course, coming up against the Blue Shirts had to feel pretty good for them and their fans even back then. And I guess on another side note, it's also interesting to point out that while the Bruins only played 5 games in the Stanley Cup playoffs, they did win all 5, something that wouldn't be done until a few decades later. And that wraps up the 1928-29 season. Hopefully you guys liked it, as we'll be moving on to the 1929-30 season, and that will be tomorrow that it comes out. So anyway, please make sure to subscribe, check out the playlist, I'll put it at the end of this video, all the good stuff. Everybody stay safe, have a great night, and you go love hockey, alright? Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.